And if the war does end, what kind of Iran would it leave in its wake? I spoke to an absolutely fascinating guest to get an answer to these questions. Hooman Majd is an American Iranian journalist and author. He's written 4 books on Iranian politics and has also worked as a translator for not one but 2 Iranian presidents, both on their visits to the United States. I began by asking whether he believes Donald Trump's explanation for backing down on his threat to bomb Iran's energy infrastructure. Namely, he said this had happened because America had been having very good and productive talks with the Iranians.
It seems very, very unlikely. I mean, his most recent statement at the air base where he was getting on Air Force One, he said that they called. They realized that, I was about to bomb at morning Tehran time on Tuesday morning, their biggest power plant. They were about to, they knew that was going to happen. $10 billion power plant gone, one shot. These are his words. And they called. I didn't call, they called, and they want to make a deal. It just seems incredibly unlikely. He gave this ultimatum at night, 8 o'clock at night. None of his aides would have been around. He's sitting there on social media saying, okay, what am I going to do now? And he tweets that or posts that he's going to blow up a power plant unless Iran opens the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians immediately said, if you try to blow up a power plant, we will attack, infrastructure in the region, presumably desalination plants. That's the easiest thing for Iran to attack at this point. Dubai, for example, I guess most of their drinking water comes from desalination plants. So that's what Iran said. It's possible, it's likely, I should say, that they would be able to go through with that threat, the Iranians. And so why they would, call in the middle of the night or on Sunday morning, hey, Mr. Trump, we want to make it. Who are they going to call, first of all? The only person who has had any contact at all since the June war, about last year, is Steve Witkoff and the Iranian foreign minister. It is possible that the Iranian foreign minister has had or has gotten exchanged messages from Witkoff, the negotiator. It's also entirely possible that Oman or one of the mediators, Turkey, who do talk to Iran and are friendly with Iran, or even Qatar, have passed messages from one to the other. But, no, he's not getting a phone call from President Trump, even though all journalists in Washington, D.C. have his phone number. The Iranians might have it as well, but I don't think they're calling him on his cell phone saying, we want to make a deal. That's just preposterous.
So the most plausible sequence of events, you seem to be suggesting, I definitely agree, is that Trump made this threat, Iran made their counter threat, to attack energy and desalination facilities in the region, and Trump backed down because he saw that outcome as being too damaging. Iran have come out and said these talks didn't take place. I mean, is there a world in which they should have gone along with it? Because, looking at Washington, it seems like Donald Trump is trying to find a way that he can withdraw the Americans from this war while saving face. Should the Iranians maybe just let him save face?
Well, no. I think as far as the Iranians are concerned, no. Because what the Iranians want after this war is over, and it will be over at a certain point, what they want is to be in a much stronger negotiating position than they were right before the war started. And they will be, because now they've shown that they can withstand this assault, massive assault by both Israel, 2 superpowers, basically, at least nuclear powers, and one great superpower, for now going into the 4th week. And, the country is still operating, stores are still open, the regime is still there despite having some of its top leadership gone. So what they're going to want out of this is that they're not going to want a premature ceasefire. They're not going to give him a way out. They're going to extract, at least this is what they're trying to do, in my opinion, and what they've sort of indicated in so many ways that they're trying to do is extract as many concessions from Trump that they can. They would have made a deal with Trump, with Witkoff, on that Thursday before the war in February that was much better than Obama's deal. And Trump could have taken it and said, I made a better deal than Obama, which all along is basically what he wanted to do. Whether he was pushed by Netanyahu, whether there's some of the hawks in the Senate here, Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham were pushing him, other hawks, think tanks like FDD, were pushing him to go to war. other Iranians, including in the exile, including the Shah's son, who wants to be the new Shah or wants to be the new leader in Iran. Whatever it was, he decided to go for it. So now the Iranians are saying, well, what we need is an absolute non-aggression pact so that there's no more wars after this one. You can't attack us again. You've done this twice. You can fool me once, but you're not twice.
I mean,
as George Bush said. So I don't think Iran should have, probably in their own minds, given him a way out. At the end of the day, they also know that Trump is the kind of person who, if he wants a way out, he'll just declare it. He'll just say, I won. And if that's what he wants, he'll do that. But Iran wants concessions. They want sanctions lifting. They want all kinds of things that puts them in a better position. And in all probability, if you think about it, Trump will probably give them that in order to stop the war. I mean, let's also look at what happened today. The Dow Jones jumped up by, I think, 3% already. Over 1,000 points and every stock market index is up. Oil probably went down, and the 5 days conveniently gets you to Friday evening at 8 p.m. when the markets are closed, and he can go into the weekend and either attack or not attack, but he can at least it gives him 5 days to figure out, is there a way for me to get out of this? Is there an off-ramp for me that I can save face? And if not, maybe I do attack on Friday night.
Escalating every Friday night after the markets close and then de-escalating every Monday morning before they reopen is a very sort of macabre form of Groundhog Day. In terms of what kind of agreement they could come to, you're sounding actually more optimistic about it than most people I've spoken to, because lots of people worry, how can these two parties come to any kind of agreement when they've been torn up in the past? When Trump agrees anything, it doesn't tend to be worth the paper it's written on. Last time the Iranians went into negotiations with the Americans killed their leaders. So is it plausible to suggest that there could be any kind of deal to end this war?
I'm not sure the deal is to end the war. I think the war ends first, almost. I think somehow Trump decides that the war has to end. And Iran is in a position where it can make certain demands. I don't know if a non-aggression pact will be right on the table right away, but I think with the regional leaders, Qatar and Emirates, Oman, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they will all want a deal that is, somewhat gives them some security moving forward, assuming that the regime doesn't fall and assuming that there isn't a ground invasion by Trump, which is always possible. Apparently, I think on Wednesday, the first 2,500 Marines arrive in the region, which is, again, we could have a ground war. This is unknown. But yeah, I do think that there's a possibility once the shooting stops, and assuming that Trump can also persuade Netanyahu to stop shooting. Israel was bombing infrastructure last night, and they actually openly said, we're bombing infrastructure, which is, arguably against international law if you're bombing power plants and stuff like that. And Tehran had blackouts all over Tehran last night. So whether Trump can persuade Netanyahu to also stop shooting, then it becomes like, okay, yeah, I can see Iran. Iran needs sanctions relief. It absolutely needs that. If it doesn't get it, what's going to happen is another 6 months from now, they'll have another January 8th, where thousands of people get killed by the regime because, and that's not, sustainable in the long term. And they know that. The Iranian regime knows that. There's a reason why they were negotiating with Trump in February. They didn't really trust Witkoff and Kushner. They didn't really trust Trump, but they just come out of those protests in January that had started as economic protests and then turned into violent anti-regime protests by some of the protesters, not all. And what happened then, we all know what happened. We have to revisit that. But as far as the Iranian regime is concerned, that can't happen again. And, slaughtering more people, which they will have to do, they will do in their own minds to preserve the regime, is not sustainable in the long term. So but the only way you can get sanctions relief is to make a deal with Trump. That's it. There's no other way. They've tried it with the Europeans. They've tried it with the UK. They've tried it with Germany. They've tried to push when Trump first tore the deal up. They waited for a whole year before they violated the nuclear deal that Trump tore up. And they were telling the Europeans, you guys have to compensate for what Trump is doing. The Europeans were unable to. I'm not saying they didn't want to. They created this Instex, I think it was called, some kind of like bartering system where Iran could sell its oil and receive like goods in return instead of money to avoid the banking sanctions, all kinds of strange stuff. But anyway, the point is they still need, and that didn't work, by the way. So what they need is sanctions relief to get their economy back on track, assuming again that the regime survives, and get people, listen, the regime probably has between 10 and 20% hardcore loyalists. You see them whenever they call them out to come for rallies, for mourning ceremonies, funerals for the leadership. 10 to 20% of the population actually trust and believe in this regime. Another, I'd say 20, 30, 40% even maybe are actively against the regime and will come out, not always come out, but generally really want the regime gone. And then there's another group, maybe it's as many as 40% or 50% of the people who don't like the regime, but also aren't going to get killed to get rid of it. So what they really want is a better life. And so the regime knows that. The regime knows if it gives them a better life, it'll keep its 20% support, if it's 20, let's say, and it will get the other 40%. It's never going to get the ones who want to come out and actually overthrow the regime, but it will be able to probably get a majority who may not like them, but won't be a threat to the regime.
And what effect will this war have on the Iranian opposition? I want to sort of mention a New York Times article over the weekend. It said Israel thought it could spur rebellion inside Iran. That hasn't happened. And they report that the Mossad chief, David Barnea, told Trump that Mossad would likely be able to galvanize the Iranian opposition, igniting riots and other acts of rebellion. How delegitimizing is that for the Iranian opposition in wartime, when Israel is bombing Iranian infrastructure, to have the Mossad chief, or it being briefed that the Mossad chief has close ties to the Iranian opposition?
The ties that the Mossad has and the Israeli government has to the opposition is with the prince, the Shah's former prince, the Shah's son. He went to Israel. He's met with Netanyahu. He's clearly been briefed by Mossad. He's briefed Mossad. His supporters wave Israeli flags at rallies, including in London. I'm sure you've seen them on television or on social media. It's a very close partnership between the son of the Shah, and he is probably the most visible of and probably has the most support, I would say, even though it's not a majority in my opinion, and it's not possible to really know what kind of support he has inside Iran beyond people. Some people actually wanting him to come, other people saying, well, he's better than this. We don't really like it, but he's better than what we have now. So it's really hard to gauge because there aren't any really accurate polls on that. But no, I wrote in The Guardian on the weekend about the diaspora and the opposition, and it's incredibly divided. There are people who support this war still to this day. There are others who are coming to slowly regret it because they never thought that the war would include bombing infrastructure or killing school children, for example, and continuing to do so. They're feeling that they're going to get blamed if the regime survives. It's like, oh, you guys called for this war, and look what this war has done. The regime is still there, and yet their infrastructure has been destroyed, and let's say 5,000 Iranians have lost their lives. So how are you going to justify that? So I think there's a lot of, the opposition is very divided. People see the regime as weak and potentially a regime that can be overthrown, but there is no ground operation inside Iran, other than people going out and protesting, that can take over the government. It's not like Khomeini in 1979 when he had a ground operation inside Iran because he had every single mosque in the entire country that were his headquarters, essentially came down to being his headquarters. And he had a government in exile almost with all his advisors around him. Pahlavi doesn't have that. The MEK, the Mujahideen, who used to be on the terrorist list of the United States, and I think Europe, most of Europe too, they're considered a cult. They have hardly any real support inside Iran because they sided with Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq war. So those are the two main opposition groups. They hate each other. They despise each other. They're willing to kill each other. So yeah, I think Pahlavi, I don't know why he decided to ally himself with Israel, but I think given what's happening now with the war, he probably thought that this war would enable him. And with Israel wanting to start a war and being able to persuade a president like Trump that he should join in the war twice now, has probably given Pahlavi the idea, well, the reason he went to Israel in the first place, probably thought, this is my chance. This is the one chance I have. He's 63 years old. If he doesn't do it now and the regime doesn't collapse, that's pretty much it for him.
That was only the first half of my interview with Hooman Majd. A really interesting guy. And we sort of got a bit deeper as we went on, talked about his background, sort of meeting those Iranian presidents. You can watch that tonight at 9 p.m. The Economist is almost 200 years old. It's one of the most